Today we're going to talk about the skin. The skin has two basic layers to it, the epidermis and the dermis. Now below the dermis is a region called the hypodermis made of adipose tissue. And while it is not part of the skin proper, it is typically displayed in models because it has various appendages and neural structures that we have associated with it. Well, let's begin with the epidermis. At the very base of the epidermis is the stratum basale. It's one layer thick, and this is where mitosis takes place. This is also rich in melanocytes, which are the cells that produce pigment for our skin. Above that is stratum spinosum. Stratum spinosum is the bulk of the living tissue of the skin, and these particular cells are connected to each other with desmosomes, which give them kind of a starry appearance once they are prepared for microscopic slides. Above that is the stratum granulosum. This is where the cells start to die, and they also start to prepare various vesicles filled with keratin as well as, or the precursor to keratin, as well as the precursor for a pigment called lipofuscin. Above that is something called stratum lucidum. Stratum lucidum is not found in hairy skin, so our model maker is giving us a bit of a bonus here. But nonetheless, it's a few cell layers thick, and it typically does not absorb stain. It is dead tissue, however, and above that is, of course, the stratum corneum. This is all dead tissue. This is the tissue we are, of course, shedding all the time. Notice that there are various hill-like structures associated with the epidermis and the dermis, and these are referred to as the dermal papillae. These contain predominantly areolar connective tissue as well as some reticular tissue. And of course, this contains blood vessels which will feed the stratum basale. The area below the papillary layer is made predominantly of dense, irregular connective tissue, and that is the reticular layer of the dermis. Now let's take a look at a few structures that we find within the skin. This, of course, is a hair follicle, and this is a hair shaft traveling through the hair follicle. We also see the sebaceous glands here, which are producing sebum, which is a substance that is oily that allows for the hair and skin to remain supple. Likewise, there is the erector pili muscle. Erector pili muscle gives us goosebumps when we're cold or when we're afraid. Now let's take a look at some other structures. This particular one is called the bulb of Krauss. Now the bulb of Krauss is typically associated with mucous membranes, and so again, maybe our model maker is getting a little bit happy giving us the bulb of Krauss here. This, of course, is a pressure receptor. This is the Paxinian corpuscle. This is going to be a structure that measures vibrations as well as deep pressure. Over here is the organ of Ruffini, a stretch receptor within the skin. And this is a little structure called the Meissner's corpuscle, which gives us a sense of light touch in a very specific area. We have many Meissner's corpuscles in our fingertips, which is one of the reasons why people who are blind can read Braille, because we have a relatively small receptor field. The receptor field is demonstrated here with these free nerve endings, and these receptor fields can be quite large. They can be the size of a quarter or better. So this is for temperature, for touch, and of course for pain. Now this is a sweat gland, and we can see another sweat gland here. This is oftentimes referred to as an eccrine gland, and of course this is going to produce perspiration to help cool the skin. Another touch receptor are the Merkel's discs, and of course again these are for light touch. All right, well that about wraps up our skin model. Now let's take a look at some microscopic features of the skin. I want to point out to you that this is actually not human skin. This is probably like the toe pad of a squirrel or something, but nonetheless, it gives us a very, very good representation of the layers of the epidermis. We're going to start, however, with the papillary layer of the dermis. Now, again, this is going to be a relar connective tissue. So the papillary layer here, and of course, the first layer of epidermis associated with that is going to be the stratum basale. This is, of course, the place where the majority of mitosis takes place. We're also going to find the majority of melanocytes. Above that is the stratum spinosum. Of course, this is the majority of the epidermis. And then we start to see some vesicle formation here in the stratum granulosum, of course, producing the derivatives of keratin as well as lipofuscin, which is a pigment. In this particular animal, we have a very thick stratum lucidum, and so this is much thicker than we would normally expect to find. Of course, this is also dead cells, and then here would be the stratum corneum. So the living cells are stratum basale, stratum spinosum, cells starting to die here in stratum granulosum, and then dead cells in stratum lucidum and stratum corneum. And the way to remember this is BS, girls love chocolate. So let's take a look at this. Stratum basale is B, stratum spinosum is S, girls are stratum granulosum, love is lucidum, and remember that's found in thick skin only, and chocolate is corneum. One of my TAs says big sexy girls love chocolate, so if that works better for you, then that's great. All right, let's take a look at some of the structures now of the dermis. So this, of course, is the reticular layer of the dermis, composed predominantly of dense irregular connective tissue. This is a hair follicle that we're seeing, and of course sebaceous glands right next to it. These are sweat glands composed predominantly of stratified cuboidal epithelial tissue surrounded by a relar connective tissue and of course embedded in dense irregular connective tissue. Again, sebaceous glands. And remember, the sebaceous glands are going to be producing an oily substance called sebum. Believe it or not, this is simple cuboidal epithelial tissue. And that's because these cells are actually going to be exported. So they are not actually considered layered cells. This, therefore, makes the sebaceous gland a holocrine gland. Here are the hair follicles themselves. So we can see the shaft of the hair coming through the follicle. And at the very base here, we have something called the dermal papilla. So this is the dermal papilla right here. And this is made of, again, a relar connective tissue containing blood vessels that are going to feed these multiplying cells at the hair matrix. So this is where the hair actually grows, is at the hair matrix. Associated with hair follicles are these little structures that look like strips of bacon, and these are the erector pili muscles. Erector pili muscles are responsible, again, for goosebumps, therefore warming our skin. Anytime you have muscle contraction, of course, you're converting ATP into ADP and releasing heat. And therefore, the erector pili muscles help to warm the skin. You can see this kind of crazy oblique cut of a hair follicle with sebaceous glands on the side. All right, well, that about does it. So thank you very much.